Carthage, Tunisia. What is Carthage? Hi, I'm Chanika, and this is my brother Charlie. We are chimps, and we're going to show you some interesting landmarks on the continent of Africa. Today, we are going to check out Carthage. What is Carthage? Charlie asks his older sister. Chanika answers. Carthage was a very important city in the ancient world. It was most important between 1100 and 200 BC. Chanika also tells Charlie where it was, in Tunisia. Oh, says Charlie. I remember Carthage has something to do with those famous people called the Phoenicians. Chanika adds, and why were they so famous? They were famous for many reasons, but mostly for going to battle with the biggest, most powerful civilization in the world at the time, Rome. Rome? Where was Carthage located? This is an interesting story, and a little complicated. There were several important empires in the ancient world. Some of them came before or after other civilizations. Chanika says, but when several strong empires overlapped or existed at the same time, it usually meant wars. Charlie looks at his tablet and starts to read a list of some of the ancient civilizations like Assyria, Egypt, Greek, Indus, Iran, and the Middle East. And, of course, Carthage and Rome. The people of Carthage were called Phoenicians. Carthage is unique because it was based in Tunisia, but its roots started somewhere else. Where? Asks Charlie. Chanika answers, the Levant. The what? Asks Charlie. What is the Levant? The Levant is located in the eastern area of the Mediterranean Sea. You have to remember that Columbus had not yet crossed the Atlantic Ocean, says Chanika. The known world in the ancient times for many of these empires was the Mediterranean and areas close to this famous sea. Places like Lebanon. Charlie asks, so what's the connection between Carthage and the Levant? Chanika describes how many of these ancient civilizations were seafaring people. The Phoenicians were very famous for their trading and their network of trading routes. They traveled from one place to another by boat mostly, doing trading. Many of the cities on the Mediterranean Sea were well known for having valuable things to trade. Charlie asks, like what? What did people trade along the Mediterranean Sea? Dye, Chanika explains. There were lots of things being traded every day during ancient times on the Mediterranean. Lebanon sold cedar logs to Egypt. The logs were expensive, so this made the residents of Lebanon rich. But another thing that was traded was a very famous purple dye. It was expensive because it took thousands of rock snails to make the dye. Charlie added, and I remember that purple was associated with royalty, so only the very richest members of royal families could buy this dye. The purple dye was called Tyrian dye because it came from Tyre in Lebanon. What were the borders of Carthage? Unlike an empire like Egypt, the Phoenicians didn't have a big chunk of land. Why was that? Asks Charlie. Chanika answers, because trading was the way they made their money. They were a seafaring people. They owned a narrow strip of land along the Levant in the eastern Mediterranean. But as time went on, their civilization stretched the whole way west to the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern-day Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. They crossed the Mediterranean from southern Europe to northern Africa. Chanika asks, and what famous Phoenician city was located in northern Africa? Charlie jumped in and yelled, Carthage! Their trading posts and narrow pieces of land stretched from Spain the length of the Mediterranean Sea. No wonder they were a seafaring civilization. They had many boats and were constantly sailing and trading. What was the height of the Phoenician Empire? The dates of the Phoenician Empire are about 2500 BC to 539 BC. Charlie says, "That's an awfully long time for an ancient empire to last." But they were the dates of the Phoenicians. And then there's the period where Carthage was at its height. "When was that?" asks Charlie. Chinika explains that the height of their power was from 1100 to 200 BC. The Phoenician people started to settle small coastal areas along Lebanon, Syria, and Galilee, which is northern Palestine. Chinika adds these settlements spread across the Mediterranean Sea. But there was one settlement that was more important than any of the other settlements. "I bet it's Carthage," says Charlie, and he was right. Why was Carthage so strong? Carthage was called a city-state. This means that it was bigger and stronger than just a city. Its strength was due to its good location on the trade routes of the Mediterranean, its rich land, and its ability to sell things and buy things from other traders. Eventually, Carthage became the center of the Carthaginian Empire. But when one city-state becomes more powerful and wealthier, it usually leads to one thing. "What is that?" asks Charlie. Chinika answered, "War." What does Punic mean? Chinika and Charlie had both heard the word Punic, but they didn't understand what it had to do with Carthage. Chinika got out her tablet and found out that they basically mean the same thing. The Greeks lived before the Romans, and the Greeks called them the Phoenicians. But as the Greek civilization was weakening, the Roman Empire was getting stronger. Chinika continued to read. The Romans called them the Punic people, while other cities and city-states called them the Phoenicians. At this time, the Phoenicians, or the Punic people, were very strong, and it was at this time several very famous wars were fought. They were called the Punic Wars and lasted a very long time, from 264 to 146 BC. The First and Second Punic Wars. "Wars?" asks Charlie. "How many are we talking about here?" Chinika knows this one. There were 3 Punic Wars. "Who was fighting with Carthage and why?" asks Charlie. Rome had become very strong and was interested in expanding its empire. The First Punic War was fought mostly on the island of Sicily and a little bit in North Africa. The Carthaginians lost this first war. The Second Punic War was truly amazing. The great leader of Carthage, Hannibal, actually took his armies and elephants. He crossed the snowy Alps with elephants. "Why?" asks Charlie. Chinika says it was a surprise attack. If you're in Rome and your enemy is southwest, who would ever expect Rome's enemy army to attack from the north? This remains one of the most amazing battle tactics in history. The Third Punic War. After fighting Carthage for 2 wars, Rome had had enough. Carthage had lost the First and the Second Punic Wars. "So why did they have to fight a 3rd war?" asks Charlie. Chinika explains. It's really kind of simple. Rome was tired of Carthage getting stronger after each war, and then to fight Rome again. What did Rome do? It waged the 3rd and final Punic War. What was different about this war? It took place on Carthage's land. Shanika adds, and the Romans were very serious this time. They killed all of the residents of Carthage, and they totally destroyed everything that had once made Carthage a large and successful city-state. What happened to Carthage after its destruction? One of the smart things that Romans did was to stay in Carthage. Most Romans sailed back to Rome, but many of the Romans were told to stay and make Carthage a Roman settlement. Shanika says, Carthage no longer existed. It now became the Roman province of Africa, and Utica was its capital. Under the Romans, what had been Carthage provided the Romans with grain and other food. 100 years later, Julius Caesar rebuilt Carthage as a Roman city. Is there anything from ancient Carthage left? Asks Charlie. Shanika happily responds, yes, tourists can still see the harbor and some of the ruins. Interesting facts. There were many city-states during the ancient times around the Mediterranean Sea, encompassing 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. As a result of its great power and strength, Carthage began to rule large parts of the Mediterranean. Carthage had a very powerful navy, more powerful than Rome's navy, so Carthage was able to keep Rome in check. After the Third Punic War, when Rome decimated Carthage, Rome stayed in Carthage and made Carthage a part of the Roman Empire. Carthage and then Rome. What was next? The Muslims destroyed the city in 698 and built the city of Tunis, which was the capital of Tunisia and still is to this day.